Chapter 14 of The Automobile Girls at Newport by Laura Crane. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Barbara's Secret.
Bab! What is the matter with you?
Cried Molly, for Barbara had thrown herself on the bed after their return from the ball, bursting into a torrent of tears. "Oh, I don't know," sobbed Bab. "I must be wrong or crazy or something, yet how can people doubt their own eyes?" Molly stopped spreading out her butterfly dress, in which she had looked so pretty at the party, and flung her arms round her sister.
"Just tell me what is the matter, dear. Has anyone hurt your feelings? If it's that Gladys LeBaron, I'll certainly get even with her."
But Bab didn't answer.
"I'm going to call Ruth," said Molly. "I don't want to waken Aunt Sally, but you seemed queer all the way home from the ball."
Bab sat up, when Ruth came in and dried her eyes.
"I am so sorry you feel so badly, Barbara, dear," said Ruth. "But, of course, it was a wretched mistake for you to have made. Let's try to forget that horrid scene. Some servant will pick up the necklace in the morning and return it to Mrs. Post. Hugh and I have decided that it will be wise for those of us who were in the conservatory just at the last not to speak of what happened. You will forgive us, Molly, dear, won't you, if we don't tell even you?" "No, I won't!" cried Molly, stamping her little slippered foot. "Bab can't have secrets that make her cry. Not from her own sister. And I don't see anyway what Bab has to do with Mrs. Post having lost her emerald necklace. If you think the loss is a secret, you're wrong, because everybody in the ballroom was whispering it half an hour afterwards. I heard of it from a perfect stranger."
"Molly," said Ruth quietly,
"will you please do me a favor? Don't ask Barbara to tell you what happened that has worried her. It was nothing but an unfortunate mistake, and will all blow over in the morning."
"Very well, Ruth," agreed Molly.
"I won't ask, but I'm not a baby, and I am very sure it would be better if I were told."
Thus poor Bab had no one in whom to confide, and had to bear her ugly secret all alone. Ruth kissed her good night, saying, "Cheer up, silly girl, and sleep late as you can in the morning. You know, it's to be the last day of our tennis practice, and you are going to beat me tomorrow." Ruth tiptoed over to Molly, who was undressing in silence.
"Mistress Molly," she said, "forgive me, do, please, like a dear. Talking about horrid things only makes them horrider."
Ruth, in the depths of her heart, thought that Barbara had been most unwise in her hinted accusation of Harry Townsend. For Bab's sake, she thought it best for everyone to forget what had happened. It was a fault in Ruth's nature that she loved only pleasant things, and would often give up, even when she knew she was right, in order not to make trouble. The next morning, a Barbara of heavy eyes and white cheeks joined the players on the tennis court. Plainly, Harry had confided what had happened to Gladys, for she did not speak to Bab as she came up to her, but tossed her head and bit her lips. Gladys said nothing, however, for Harry had made her promise she would not breathe what he had told her. As for Mr. Townsend, he treated Barbara with cold politeness. But Barbara was beginning to have her eyes opened. "If I am right about him," she thought to herself, "then I shall have to be very careful. I believe he is more clever than any of us dream." It was Hugh whose manner was most constrained. He could not forgive the scene of the night before, in which he had been forced to take an unwilling part. Not until Ruth called him over to her, and gave him a lecture, did he beg Bab's pardon, and ask they all forget the experience of the night before. "Come on," he called cheerily to the group of tennis players. "It's do or die today, the last test day for us. It will show us who is to represent our crowd at the tournament. The girl and the fellow who can beat all the rest of us stand a good chance of winning the silver cup. Mrs. Cartwright says she has been closely following the game of the star players, and she thinks we have them beaten to a finish. Come on, Ruth, let's show 'em that we're out for blood." Swish! Barbara's ball flew over the net and curved toward the ground at Hugh's left. Not too swiftly for that young gentleman, while Ruth's heart gave a jump of apprehension. Hugh made a left-hand swing with his racket and sent the ball whizzing back. 15, Ralph called out in a bored tone. He had failed in his return. The battle raged all morning. Grace and Donald Cartwright, Gladys and Mr. Townsend were soon out of the running. When they had finished, they sank gracefully on the ground to watch the others play. The field was thus left to Barbara and Ralph, to Ruth and Hugh. The set stood even, and 2 more games would decide. A small crowd of visitors stood around the court. Mrs. Cartwright, having finished her own game, came over to look on. Miss Sally was trying to be impartial, but she was really deeply interested in Ruth's success. Mrs. Irwin, Mrs. Post, the governor, all their friends, were lined up to behold the battle. A subdued discussion of the lost emeralds had been going on at the casino all morning. After a thorough search of every inch of Mrs. Irwin's house and grounds, there was still no sign of the jewels, but Governor Post and Mrs. Irwin had made every effort to have the scandal of the necklace hushed up. They had seen the Newport detectives, and had telegraphed to New York for 2 experts to be sent down to handle the case. In the meantime, they had been advised not to talk. Now the only upright person who could have given them any information had, for just a little while, forgotten all about it. Whatever Barbara did, she did with her whole heart. Today she played tennis. "Ralph," Hugh called, "remember now, it's 2 straight games to finish the way we stand." There was no more conversation. Even the watchers held their breath. The referee sat on the ground, rapidly calling out the score. 40, 30, deuce.
"Is this game to go on forever?" Miss Sally inquired plaintively. "My girls will be wholly worn out."
"Advantage in!" shouted the referee. Ralph sprang forward for his ball. His foot slipped. Barbara, who had been expecting him to return it, was not ready. "Game!" Ruth and Hugh shook hands with each other, but Hugh called over, "Say, Ralph, was this game all right? You turned your ankle, didn't you?" "Sure I did," said Ralph. "I was an idiot, but it is your game just the same. I'll make it up next time, Barbara. See if I don't."
"My dear Ruth," said Miss Sally, "I cannot permit it. You will be exhausted."
"Here, Barbara," said Molly.
"Do try to get your breath, and let me fix up your hair."
"No prinking," Ralph called out. "This is business, ladies." The good old casino courts never saw a finer tennis battle. Ralph and Bab played as though they had forgotten their talk in the woods that day when they had tea at Mrs. Duffy's. Ruth and Hugh were foemen worthy of their best steel. The game stood 40 tall, and it was Bab's serve. Bab's serves were what made her tennis remarkable. They were as swift and straight and true as a boy's. Hugh stood ready waiting. Barbara caught a look in Ruth's face on the other side of the net. Her big blue eyes, frank and clear as a baby's, were glowing with interest, with hope, with ambition. Like a flash, the thought of all Ruth had done for them came into Bab's mind. Did it weaken the force of her drive, or was it because her mind was distracted? The ball fell just inside the net on her own side. "Try again, partner mine," shouted Ralph. "Show 'em what you're made of." This time Barbara was plainly nervous. She felt that nearly all the friends around them wanted Ruth to win. They would be delighted, of course, with her success and kind to her, but open-hearted and open-handed Ruth was the favorite with them all. At least Bab thought so. With returning courage, Bab hit her last ball a hard blow. It rose high in the air. Hugh sprang on his tiptoes to receive it and gave a mighty shout. The ball had fallen outside the line. Ralph and Barbara were the first to congratulate the victors. Barbara cleared the net with a bound, forgetting both her age and her audience. "There, Ruth, you and Hugh are the best players that ever happened." Barbara spoke with a glowing face. Then she turned to Ralph. "I lost the game for you," she said. "I am so sorry." "Oh, no, you didn't, my lady," said Ralph. "I lost the game before this one, so we're even." An admiring circle had formed around Ruth and Hugh.
"Your father will be delighted, I know, child," said Miss Sally.
"I haven't won the cup yet, auntie," protested Ruth.
"But you must, child,"
said Mrs. Cartwright, smiling. "I am betting on you and Hugh in the tournament, and you mustn't make me lose my box of candy."
"Barbara,"
said Ralph shyly, as they walked off toward home a little later, "I don't like to ask you, but did you mean to miss those last serves?" Barbara shook her head. "No," she said.
"I don't think I meant to. I don't know. But they were the best players, weren't they, Ralph?"
"Certainly," Ralph answered. End of chapter 14.